6 books by Yeats were left in Joyce's apartment in Trieste, where he lived until 1915, when he had to leave for neutral Zurich. They were the Countess Kathleen, the Hourglass, Ideas of Good and Evil, John Sherman and Doria, The Land of Heart's Desire, and The Tables of the Law and the Adoration of the Magi. Proves that Joyce actually read and had books by Yeats in his library. Joyce met Yeats in October 1902. The young man, like the Stephen Devilis of the portrait, had just earned a Bachelor of Arts degree from the Royal University of Ireland. George Russell had spoken of him to Yeats this way: "The first spectre of the new generation has appeared. His name is Joyce. I have suffered from him, and I would like you to suffer." They met accidentally and went together to a cafe. In Richard Ellman's words, it was the moment the defected Protestant confronted the defected Catholic. The bourgeois doubling that Joyce liked, Yeats abjured, and Joyce showed contempt for both the ignorant peasantry and the snobbish aristocracy that Yeats idealized. Yet Joyce made a good impression on Yeats. Despite having been criticized by the younger Irishman for his peasant plays, Yeats wrote a humorous and detached account of the conversation later, as Ellman calls it. According to Yeats, before leaving, Joyce asked him how old he was and reported, "I have met you too late. You are too old." Too old for what? One may ask. To change by himself, or to be changed by Joyce? The Joycean evidence was at play. Joyce was then 20, and Yeats 37. Yeats would write about it 20 years later in The Tremble of the Veil. On that occasion, Joyce, in Yeats' memory, accused him of talking like a man of letters, not as a poet. A note by Joyce's first biographer, Herbert Gorman, underlines that Joyce admired Yeats tremendously and never said those words contemptibly. Whatever be the truth, his treatment of Yeats was so very different from Samuel Beckett's, when the young teacher of English and writer-to-be, arriving in Paris critique at École Normale Supérieure, met Joyce in 1928. Beckett is then 22, Joyce 46. Another interesting part of Yeats' story is the difference made by Joyce between the poet and the man of letters. It sheds an interesting light on Joyce's epiphanies. In Stephen Heater, Devilis explains that the epiphanies are to be recorded by the man of letters. Joyce wrote Stephen Heater after the conversation with Yeats, but the novel was about Joyce's day as a student. The use of the phrase "man of letters" in Stephen Heater seems to echo Joyce's back answer to Yeats, and this suggests that by the moment he met Yeats, he already had a lower regard of the epiphanies than what he had in his days as a student. Through Yeats, Joyce met Lady Gregory in November 1902 and wrote to her, but he did not have the means to pay for it, so he asked her to help in any way, which she did by writing to the editor of the Daily Express, who commissioned 14 reviews from Joyce, and also to a friend in London who wrote to another friend in Paris, Dr. Joseph Rivière. Writing to the Daily Express is a fact of life that Joyce would transfer to the Dad, where Gabriel Conroy is called the West Briton for reviewing books for the same conservative newspaper. As for Dr. Rivière, Jeremy Colangelo points out that he was a physical therapist with whom Joyce studied briefly, and that it was during his short time as a medical student that Joyce might have learned the uncommon medical term hemiplegia, that he famously used to describe Dublin. Lady Gregory also suggested Joyce that he studied medicine at Trinity College. A curious suggestion coming from someone that when asked why she had sent her son to study at Oxford, said that Oxford is much nearer Ireland than Trinity. Respect to education. Trinity College is an unavoidable topic. Yeats thought that the Theosophical Society has done more for Irish literature than Trinity College. And in Joyce, the university is a point of reference in Dublin, even to the bewildered cab driver and the dead. It's also a great block of reformed conscience in a portrait of the artist as a young man. In the end, Lady Gregory, whom Joyce met through Yeats, was a victim of another of Joyce's limericks. There was a kind lady called Gregory, said, "Come to me, poets in beggary," but found her imprudence when thousands of students cried, "Oh, we are in that category." On December 4th, 1902, Yeats wrote to Lady Gregory, "I have had Joyce with me for a day. I am trying to get him work in the academy as speaker, and I have brought him to Arthur Symons." Yeats was writing from London, where Joyce stopped on his way to Paris, where he intended to study medicine. On this occasion, Yeats introduced him to Symons, the champion of French symbolist poetry in the Anglophone world. 5 years later, Symons would suggest Joyce's suite of poems, chamber music, to Elkin Matthews, who eventually published it in 1907. Symons himself refused the book. On December 23rd, on his way back to Dublin, Joyce told Yeats of his decision to give up medicine for literature definitively. Yeats was an established poet and playwright, whose name became known outside Ireland. Joyce was known or notorious only in his circle of friends and the university community. His only published texts were so far Ibsen's new drama, The Day of the Revenant, and James Scudder's Man. Joyce and Yeats shared the same passion for the theatre, but had different views about it. Joyce had already translated 2 plays by Gerhard Hauptmann, and 2 of his 3 published essays were on theatre. Ibsen's new drama was in fact a review of the Norwegian's last play, When the Dead Awaken, and The Day of the Revenant, a violent attack on the present state of Irish literary theatre. Joyce was very much attracted by theatrical performances, although his attempts in the field all failed. He had played 2 roles in his school days, and in 1901 played the part of amateur in Margaret Sheet's Cupid's Confidante at the ancient concert rooms. It was the same place where in 1899 he had attended the premiere of Yeats' The Countess Catherine. Abiding by his decision to keep away from politics, Joyce refused to sign a letter of protest about the play. Yeats was correct in saying, to the Royal Library Fund, 16 years later, in relation to Joyce's position during the war, that Joyce did not like politics. Joyce was one of those who applauded the play among the hisses on the night of May the 8th. To Harriet Shaw Weaver, Joyce wrote that he was, and I'm quoting, the only student who refused his signature. What a lie. Peter Costello, for example, clarifies that 2 days later, a letter was published in the Freeman's Journal, signed by 23 students from University College. There were 64 students in Joyce's year alone, and 400 odd in the student body as a whole. It is significant, nevertheless, that Joyce wanted to make sure that everybody knew that he did not sign the letter. 2 years later, in The Day of Revenant, he disappointed Joyce with reproach Yeats for his association with a platform from which even self-respect should have urged him to refrain. It was not censorship, said Joyce, that deterred the Irish literary theatre from putting on plays by Ibsen, Tolstoy, and others. but shyness in relation to the public judgment. In 1913, it was Yeats who showed Joyce's poem I Hear an Army to Ezra Pound. He published it in the anthology Les Imagistes in 1914. As Costello again puts it, Yeats emerged from the confusion of his own papers with Joyce's poem. Simons was very enthusiastic about the poem, much more than Pound, who seems to have simply acquiesced during the publication. To Yeats, the poem was a delight for its substance and for its technical mastery. In 1915, Yeats interceded for Joyce with the Royal Library Fund, and Joyce was granted £75, a considerable help in the post-war period for someone living abroad with wife and 2 children. But in 1917, Yeats decided not to recommend Exiles, Joyce's play, to the Abbey Theatre. Yeats rejected it for being too far from folk drama. This was the third refusal from Yeats. In 1904, Joyce had sent Yeats in Galway his translations of Houghton's plays. The more experienced poet trusted a friend with the exam of Joyce's translations, and the result was communicated by Yeats to Joyce by letter. You are not a very good German scholar. But this was not the only reason for rejection, and Yeats did not miss the opportunity to provide his view on the Irish theatre. He wrote to Joyce, "Nor do I think it very likely we could attempt German work at present. We must get the ear of our public with Irish work." Joyce aimed at a foreign accent, Yeats at a genuine Irish one. The second time Yeats refused the work done by Joyce was in 1911. Joyce and the Trieste lawyer Niccolò Vidakovich translated the Countess Catherine into Italian. As a matter of fact, Joyce seems to have played the role of consultant and animator, more or less the same he would play when his Ulysses was translated into French. However, La Contessa Catherine did not please Yeats and was turned down by the author. Joyce wrote to Weaver that the project failed as we had translated the first version of Mr. Yeats, and he did not wish that version to be offered to the Italian public. But the annotator of the translation for an Italian edition, Carlo Marengo Vaglio, explains that the translation was actually based on the 1899 version of the play, which is the third one, first published in 1901 and 1902 editions of Yeats' poems. Only the first of the 4 acts of the translation is extant. In September 1932, Joyce, no longer a young man, but the famed author of Ulysses, Yeats and Bernard Shaw offered him membership as founder member of the new enterprise, the Irish Academy of Letters. Joyce declined the invitation. The New York Times gave this crosshead: Joyce rejects bid of Irish Academy. Not even Joyce's father's death the year before had made him set foot on Ireland again. The last time he saw Ireland was in 1912. Yeats' appeal to fight against censorship was not enticing or convincing enough. And a not totally insignificant detail is that Shaw, himself a victim of censorship, had refused to buy Ulysses when it was published in 1922. But Joyce's answer did not follow right away. He might have hesitated, for it took him more than a month to send a letter of reply to Yeats, one in which he made it clear that he was grateful for Yeats' helpful hand of 30 years ago. Some final remarks. Calvin Sullivan, the one who wrote about Joyce and Justice, regards Finnegan's Wake as a consciously wrought classic, demanding of the reader an effort of imagination which, however different, is never wholly impossible. In the middle of this comment about Joyce's most radical and inclassifiable work, Sullivan also affirmed in passing that Joyce was as self-consciously a great poet as Yeats or Milton. Stating that Yeats as a poet sounds as an obtuseness, but comparing Joyce to Yeats as a poet may raise a few eyebrows. Joyce the poet, in the strict sense of verse writer, is the minor Joyce, although this view has been recently reassessed. Joyce critic Robert Scholes wrote, and I quote, "I think we can safely say that Joyce began and ended his literary career with a desire to be an Irish poet. From chamber music to Finnegan's Wake, this concept of the meaning of Irish poet no doubt evolved considerably, beginning with the notion of someone who was born in Ireland and wrote elegant verses, but culminating with the idea of squeezing the universe inside the four walls of a Dublin pub. In just this manner, we must expand our own concept of what an Irish poet might be, in order that it may encompass and accommodate Joyce's peculiar genius." End of quotation. The self-consciousness referred to by Sullivan perhaps is what allows us to think of Joyce as a poet like Yeats. In both men, the word poet means maker more than writer of verse. By expanding the notion of poet or Irish poet as Scholes proposes, that is, as I understand it, by stopping dividing writers by the form or genre of the finished texts and uniting them by the characteristics of their writing, one can see these two Irish writers in the light of the poetic consciousness. These characteristics are, of course, not monochromatic. They encompass differences, but ones that do not sever one from the other and instead approximate them by contrast. When I say poem, I say literature, wrote French poet and critic Henri Michelet. History is full of curiosities. Ulysses, the most influential novel of the 20th century, was published in the year that Marcel Proust died. Proust, an innovator undoubtedly, was a 19th century writer in the 20th century. Finnegan's Wake, for some of the first postmodernist work in literature, came to light in the year that Yeats died. Although Yeats was no Proust, it would not be incorrect to say that the same sense of the ending of an era is felt in his death, in relation to Finnegan's Wake, as that of Proust's death, that of Proust's in relation to Ulysses. Another poet joined the intertext of late, Samuel Beckett. Reader of Proust, poet of the absurd, Joyce's heir, he found in Yeats' The Tower, quoted this morning, more than a line for his television play of The Clouds. The wreck of the body of Molloy, Malone, and others was already in Yeats. What shall I do with this absurdity? Is a question that some of Beckett's characters could have asked it in their own decrepit age. These curiosities relating Proust, Yeats, Joyce, Beckett exist to entertain us, or, as Joyce once put it, to keep the professors busy for centuries. We can only hope that not, as in Yeats' poem The Scholars, bald heads forgetful of their sins, I should say, our sins, who think what other people think. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Peter. I'm sure you will have some talk afterwards about there's so many topics such as influences, interferences, convergences, divergences, Irishness, and so on. So let's move on to William Weber. He's recently defended his doctoral dissertation entitled William Blake's editors from 1893 to the present, an analysis of 4 collected editions at the Federal University of Santa Catarina in Brazil, and his dissertation includes a chapter on the 1893 edition of Blake's collected works by Edwin John Ellis and Yeats. He's currently an independent researcher and working on editions of British Romantic poets in the modernist period, and his title of his talk is Yeats Haunts William Blake's Reception, analyzing the impact of his editions of Blake's works. William, thank you.
Só tá no. Aqui.
Nossa. Eu vou só compartilhar assim.
Okay, thank you everyone. I would like to start by stating why is my interest in Yeats at this moment. For my PhD dissertation, which I defended recently, I worked with 4 collected editions of William Blake's works, trying to understand how the editorial decisions configure a certain way to depict Blake, a way that becomes influential, especially when the editions are well regarded and seen as authoritative. One of the editions I've worked with was the work by Yeats and Edwin John Ellis, the works of William Blake, Poetic, Symbolic, and Critical, published in 1893. I will talk about it soon, but just to clarify, my current research is on the editions of British Romantic poets, published in what is roughly the modernist period. And this is why I'm still interested in Ellis and Yeats' edition, the way it seriously impacted the reception of Blake. As you can see, I come from the perspective of book history and textual criticism, trying to understand the way the intermediaries between author and reading public, that is to say, the British Romantic poets and the public in the modernist period, how these key intermediaries, these editors, they socialize and they transmit the work of these poets. So here I'm concerned with Yeats, the editor, more specifically Blake's editor. Okay. I bring here a contextualization of Ellis and Yeats' edition. It was published in 1893 in 3 volumes and was the first edition of Blake's works that proclaimed completeness. This was not true, at least not to our standards nowadays, but still it is an important event in the transmission of Blake's works. We have to keep in mind that collected editions are crucial events in the consecration of authors, and in a sense, Ellis and Yeats' edition is the culmination of a process which started with Alexander Gilchrist's biography of Blake, published in 1863. The biography included a volume edited by Dante Gabriel Rossetti with a selection of Blake's works. In truth, the selection by Rossetti prioritized short lyrics, dismissing the longer prophetic books, or better yet, salvaging from the prophetic books examples of short lyrics. The best example would be the short poem starting with the line, "And did those feet in ancient time," which became known misleadingly as Jerusalem, and even though it was taken from the long poem Milton. Ellis and Yeats' edition is not only a much more complete depiction of Blake's works when compared with the work of earlier editors, it also brings facsimiles of the illuminated books, which were produced by the editors themselves using lithography and photographic techniques. You see an example on the screen. The edition also carries a crucial turning away from the short lyrics, focusing instead on prophetic books. Up until that point, the prophetic books were considered unintelligible. The poet Algernon Swinburne wrote favorably about them in 1868 in a book on Blake, but his understanding was far from what anyone with a minimum understanding of Blake's mythopoeia nowadays would consider adequate. Instead, his defense went more along the lines of how evocative the longer poems were, instead of trying to make sense of them. Ellis and Yeats' edition, on the other hand, is the first systematic attempt to understand Blake's mythopoeia. In the 3 volumes of their editions, only the last one brings Blake's works. In the volumes 1 and 2, Alice and Yeats constructed a complex and sometimes barely intelligible paratextual apparatus to analyze and explain the mythological system Blake constructed in the prophetic books. This is done concomitantly with the shunning of the short lyrics. For them, the short lyrics are the work of Blake the penman, not Blake the mystic, and Blake the mystic is the one they are interested in. Last time I presented at this conference in 2022, I entered into more details about the textual practice of Alice and Yeats in this edition. This is not my focus today, but I just want to explain that in a lot of ways they vulgarized Blake's text, omitting passages they deemed indecent, fixing the rhythm and meter of poems, and shaping everything to suit their particular view of Blake's works. This was all done, ironically, while claiming fidelity to Blake's intention, in a clear example of idealist editing. In this sense, they maintain an editorial tradition that started with Dante Rossetti, who was not shy about improving Blake's verse. Alice and Yeats continued this, a lot of times copying the text of these earlier editors, both Rossetti and his brother William Michael. Most notoriously and most fascinatingly, this is done in their editing of the manuscript of the Four Zoes or Vela. This was the first time the manuscript was printed, even though Gilchrist already knew about it. For the editing of the Four Zoes, Alice and Yeats tried first to arrange what they called a heap of unnumbered and unsorted pages. To this effort, they failed, or at least every subsequent editor will claim so. But still, it was a first try. They also made changes in the text as it survives in the manuscript. I must add that last time I presented, Professor Adrian Patterson here called my attention to the fact that it was most probably Alice who made all of this editing of the Four Zoes. Still, at least in the paratexts, they did not at any time singularize their jobs. Anyway, this change in the Four Zoes was mainly done to regularize meter, turning the irregular poem concocted by Blake into a more regular, easier to read poem using a 14er meter. They also made changes to spelling, punctuation, and shuffled words around to make the grammar more easily understood. This is consistent with their objective, which was to make the mythological system more evident, turning the reader's eyes away from the odd particularities of Blake's spelling and punctuation, something that anyone here accustomed to Birdman's edition of Blake's works will certainly recognize. As I mentioned before, their interpretation of Blake's mythological system comes from a view of Blake as a mystic writer. Blake then contacted the Spiritus Mundi, and with that he wrote his prophetic books. This is a rough, let's say, a summary, but still. Because of this, in their view, Blake could be read in a mystical key, bringing in particular the works of Emanuel Swedenborg and Jacob Boehme to explain the mythological system. Well, you might be questioning, as I'm mentioning Ellis several times, and Ellis was indeed a very important actor in the creation of the edition, and later he wrote his own biography of Blake and created his own editions as well. So why am I not talking about him too, or why in the title I chose to particularize Yeats? In a sense, a lot of what I am talking about has to do with both Ellis and Yeats. Still, I would argue that as Yeats' reputation enlarged, and Alice became an unknown somehow, he was somehow swallowed by Yeats. Importantly, Alice's editions of selections of works by Blake did not receive reprints as Yeats' did, still in fact being reprinted in the 21st century. I believe what I'm bringing here somehow depicts this. What you see here is an image showing Blake's Wikipedia. You won't find this right now because an update in 2023 suppressed it. But for years, this was what was written there. As you can see, it was citing an edition of Blake's works by Yeats and propagating the idea that Blake's father was Irish. This factoid was first announced in Alice and Yeats' edition, but it was also propagated in their other works on Blake, both their separate editions as well as Alice's biography. There was indeed a James Blake in London in the 18th century that was of Irish descent, but it was not the same James Blake who was William Blake's father. I won't speculate here if this mistake was intentional or not, but we still will see this factoid coloring Blake's receptions years after Alison Yeats' edition was published. Indeed, as you can see on the screen, up to our own days. You see that unlike Ellis, Yeats is still relevant in the reception of Blake because his edition continues to be reprinted. This has much less to do with Yeats' ability as an editor, to our standards at least, than with his reputation somehow lending credit to this edition, and also for persons interested in Yeats to have access to his editions because they tell much more about Yeats himself than they tell about Blake. And you might say, well, this is the Wikipedia, this isn't that reliable, but still we as scholars use it sometimes to get acquainted with a new subject. And while the information given until 2022 was probably minor and innocuous, it still is misinformation spread in last analysis because of Yeats' reputation. It was only in the 1940s that the factoid was denied by H.M. Margoliouth. This did not prevent many persons to continue to adhere to it. Bizarrely, even scholarly, supposedly rigorous works continued not only to cite this, but use it as a form of understanding Blake's works. For instance, when talking about, in their edition, Ellis and Yeats used this factoid sparingly to, let's say, to interpret Blake's works. For instance, when talking about Blake's writing, they say that the very manner of Blake's writing has an Irish flavor, a lofty extravagance of invention and epithet. And also when talking about Blake's eyes, and I quote again, it was a physical advantage that he had, along with his Irish blood. But consider other ways in which this factoid haunted Blake's reception. Elizabeth O'Higgins is a good example. This scholar published in the 1950s and 60s essays on Blake. In them, O'Higgins used the factoid of Blake's Irish ancestry to support a reading of his oeuvre in which he is inserted into an Irish literary tradition. O'Higgins was certainly the critic who used the factoid to its utmost consequence, creating what E.B. Bentley called, and I quote, decorative flights of criticism. Still, she was not the only one doing this, and certainly she was not the only one reading Blake on the footsteps of Yeats. As I said, Alison Yeats' edition was published in 1893, and in the same year, Yeats published his own selection of Blake's poems, published both in England and the United States. It included not only a selection of Blake's works, but paratexts with biographical notes and the same interpretative thing seen on the collaborative edition of the same year, that is to say, reading Blake as a mystic writer. This edition was reissued in 1905, now by the label Routledge's Muses Library, which aimed to create, and I quote, scholarly reprints of the works of standard poets by eminent specialists. We can find irony in the fact that Yeats' edition was reissued in a series of scholarly reprints. The same Yeats who, together with Ellis, wrote in their 1893 edition, and I quote, with every year poetry tends to fall more and more into the clutches of the merely scholarly editors, who prize exact reproduction of an error above the enjoyment of 10 beautiful songs. That his edition was reputed scholarly, however, was and published in a well-reputed label, is a testament to the enduring influence of Yeats' reading on Blake's reception. I believe the irony is there, certainly, but also that we can use this connection or disconnection with the scholarly work to understand both the huge influence Alison Yeats' reading had on the reception of Blake up until the 1930s at least. And with this, we can also understand the animosity of later editors and scholars who understood Alison Yeats' influence on Blake in a completely negative, derogatory manner. We have to remember that this period, the end of the 19th and beginning of the 20th century, saw the consolidation of the English discipline in the universities, It was at this point that the cultural capital of literature was starting to change from what John Guillory calls the cultural capital of the old bourgeoisie to the cultural capital of literature, turning to the universities, in particular the postgraduate programs. Now, this will only be completely established in Guillory's view after the Second World War, in what he terms the post-war settlement. But we do see here with Alison Yates complaining about scholarly editors, the clash between two different ways of understanding the job of the editor, and ultimately, I would argue, the nature of literature. When Alison Yates were publishing their editions, scholarly editors were mainly preoccupied with either works from the classical/biblical tradition, or in the case of vernacular literatures like English, very specific periods, most notoriously for English, the Elizabethan period, mainly Elizabethan drama, and of course, mainly Shakespeare. I have to advance in my current research on editions of other Romantic poets, but for now we could say that, with some exceptions, editing the work of authors from later periods, such as the Romantic period, meant freedom of manipulation of the text, similar to the one we see in Alison Yates' edition, even if usually not with the same intensity. Though well reputed, these authors, the Romantic poets, Blake and Blake somehow included, were not yet unanimously seen as suitable subjects for academic enterprise. One professor from the period derisively mentions people in the universities who produce, and I quote, chatter about Shelley. I believe here we can pause and think about some causes of the endurance of Yeats's editions and the influence of his interpretation of Blake's works. I already mentioned that with Alison Yates there is a shift towards the prophetic books and towards the mythopoeia. This meant a new interest in Blake's oeuvre that was indeed pursued by readers and later scholars. This, I believe, is an important cause for the influence of their editions. Alison Yates opened the doors to a way of assessing an old poet. Yeats's reputation is also something I mentioned, but this only comes later. I believe we cannot point to Yeats's reputation as a factor in the reprinting of his edition by Routledge in 1905. What I see, however, as a crucial factor is the ambiguity of his job as editor. He and Ellis shun scholarly editors, yet they are seen as specialists and scholars. Theirs were not scholarly editions, yet with all the massive parasexual apparatus, they somehow inspire the credibility of scholarly work. This ambiguity suits the period very well because this is a period of transformation for the cultural capital of literature. And here's where I diverge from scholars who later evaluated the work of Ellis and Yeats as Blake's editors. In 1964, G. Bentley was a very important Blake scholar, and Martin Hermey, in their bibliography of Blake's works, wrote a brief reception history of Blake's works, and there is a section entirely dedicated to Ellis and Yeats called The Unreal Blake. Bentley and Hermey are extremely dismissive of Ellis and Yeats' efforts, though it was a labor of love, according to them. The result, and I quote, was a new man and a new myth, more mysterious, supernatural, and Celtic, the terms are almost interchangeable in this context, than anything Blake's friends would have recognized. One of the most important Blake scholars of the 20th century, David V. Erdman, whose printed edition is still considered authoritative, also mocks Ellis and Yeats' editions, even though not criticizing Ellis and Yeats directly. Also, another scholar, of course, Harold Bloom, in his Blake's Apocalypse, published in 1964, derisively mentions the plethora of works on Blake that connect him with a mystical tradition, and these works are simply heirs of Ellis and Yeats' interpretations. What I believe these scholars miss is that the change in cultural capital, the necessity of English
internet da
Pronto,
internet
voltamos.
caiu.
Voltamos.
Voltou?
Sim.
Hello, Daniel. Are you there?
Olá, vocês me ouvem?
Sim, sim. O som. Só um minutinho.
Você consegue conectar o Bluetooth aí?
É esse aqui, né?
Não, acho não.
É essa aqui?
Sim, tá
The
ligado.
next presentation is going to be in Portuguese, after which we have the questions and answers. I wonder if those willing to know what he's going to talk about, can you say use of artificial intelligence?
Você pode falar alguma coisa pra gente?
Opa,
Pronto. Prontinho. Peraí.
boa tarde.
Boa tarde, deixa eu te apresentar, Daniel, por favor. So Daniel he has a degree in philosophy, he's also licensed in philosophy from the University of São Paulo, he's a specialist in history from the Catholic University of São Paulo, and he's an MA in philosophy from the Federal University of Uberlândia, and his research interests are connected with the Renaissance philosophy and Western esotericism. The title of his talk is Yeats and Christian Theosophy. Yeats e a Teosofia Cristã. And it's going to be in Portuguese, like I said. Daniel, você pode começar.
Boa tarde. Primeiramente, desculpa por apresentar em português, mas eu não sou fluente em inglês. Também sou especialista em Yeats, porém minha área de estudo é filosofia perene e esoterismo. E quando eu soube do evento, eu não podia perder a oportunidade de apresentar alguma coisa, por mais modesta e incipiente que seja. Tá? Então, vou começar a apresentação sobre Yeats e a teosofia cristã. Teosofia, do grego sabedoria divina, foi um termo usado primeiramente pelos filósofos neoplatônicos da Antiguidade Tardia, entre os séculos 3 e 6 da Era Comum, retomado no Renascimento Europeu e ulteriormente com a Sociedade Teosófica nos séculos 19 e 20. Este tema da teosofia pode ser encontrado em diversas obras de Yeats, o qual sabidamente foi membro da Sociedade Teosófica e influenciado por vários autores da linha teosófica. Todavia, justamente por sua amplitude e complexidade, seria inviável, dentro dos limites de espaço que temos aqui, abordá-lo de maneira realmente pormenorizada. Ademais, a relação de Yeats com a teosofia já foi revolvida em estudos específicos, como o de Kniavel em relação ao Bem e o de Monteith, mais em relação à sociedade teosófica. À luz desse quadro, a partir de um leque recortado de obras de Yeats, como sua autobiografia, uma visão e alguns ensaios, além do apoio a alguns comentadores, vamos priorizar aqui a relação introdutória de Yeats com a teosofia no seu ramo cristão, consumado em autores como Bam, Swedenborg e Blake. Desse modo, nessa exposição, pretendemos, primeiro, conceituar a teosofia e diferenciar suas ramificações. Segundo, caracterizar e problematizar a relação de Yeats com a teosofia, em especial a teosofia cristã. Vocês estão conseguindo me ouvir bem?
Sim, sim.
Obrigado. Então, vou começar. O termo teosofia, sabedoria divina, foi inicialmente utilizado na Antiguidade Tardia por filósofos neoplatônicos como Porfírio e Próclo, cuja obra Yeats conhecia muito bem, o último bastião do paganismo e hostil ao cristianismo em ascensão, enquanto sinônimo de uma filosofia de índole mística, sincrética e universal. Com o passar do tempo, o termo foi associado mais estritamente a uma forma de esoterismo cristão que surgiu na Alemanha renascentista, a partir de Paracelso, Weigel e outros, cujo influxo chegou mais tarde na França, Inglaterra, Suécia, Rússia, entre outros países. Em meados do século XVIII, na era do Iluminismo, a teosofia será atacada e desacreditada por autores como Diderot, pintando-a como uma filosofia pretensiosa, irracionalista e desvairada na famosa enciclopédia, assim como Kant tratará Swedenborg como um fantasista alucinado. Já no contexto romântico, Em relação à filosofia das luzes, teremos como continuadores dessa teosofia cristã, além de Swedenborg, autores como Samartin, Oettinger, von Baader, Blake, Eckhart Rosen, Schelling, entre outros. Contudo, no último cartel do século XIX, sob o impacto do positivismo, do materialismo e do evolucionismo, por um lado, e do espiritismo francês e do ocultismo inglês, do outro, a teosofia, às vezes chamada de filosofia perene ou tradição, retornará à cultura da Europa em uma forma nova, com destaque para a influência do trabalho de orientalistas, especialmente de indólogos, para os quais os textos hindus antigos eram a fonte primeva de todas as religiões da humanidade. Um desses especialistas precursores foi Burrow, que chegou à suposição de que a ciência indiana e druídica do passado teria sobrevivido mais tarde na maçonaria. Apesar de não sabermos com certeza se o coronel Alcott leu diretamente os trabalhos de Burrow, desde 1824 aproximadamente, já era possível encontrar traduções em língua inglesa de obras clássicas indianas como a Bhagavad Gita, que influenciou nos Estados Unidos autores como Emerson. Provavelmente foi através de Emerson e dos transcendentalistas dos Estados Unidos que Alcott chegou à teosofia sob um matiz védico ou indiano. Em 1875, o coronel Alcott fundou a Sociedade Teosófica em Nova York, com o intuito de comparar as religiões e buscar uma sabedoria antiga, a fonte primordial das religiões, presente tanto em Hermes quanto nos Vedas. Na criação da Sociedade Teosófica, Alcott associou-se a Helena Blavatsky, desde 1883, presente nos Estados Unidos. Blavatsky afirmou que o ensinamento teosófico contido nos volumes da obra Doutrina Secreta, publicada em 1888, ainda que incompleto e fragmentário, não pertencia a nenhuma religião específica, seja ocidental ou oriental, pois era a essência de todas elas e renascia de tempos em tempos. Então aqui agora eu começo a abordar a relação de Yeats com a teosofia. Por volta de 1835, Yeats, sob a influência direta da literatura teosófica em voga, fundou a Double Hermetic Society. Em 1887, chegou a conhecer pessoalmente Madame Blavatsky, em Londres, de quem teve e guardou uma impressão assaz positiva. Em 1888, foi admitido na seção esotérica da Sociedade Teosófica. Por volta de 1889, portanto, nesse mesmo período teosófico, tal como relata em sua autobiografia, Yeats, junto com o poeta Ellis, se voltou para a filosofia de William Blake e afirmou que seu estudo, abre aspas, requer um conhecimento exato para sua busca e que traça a conexão entre seu sistema e o de Swedenborg, ou de Boehme. Reconheci certas atribuições, do que às vezes é chamado de cabala cristã, das quais Ellis nunca tinha ouvido falar, e com essa prova de que sua interpretação era mais do que fantasia, ele e eu começamos nosso trabalho de 4 anos nos livros proféticos de William Blake. Fecha aspas. Sabe-se que nesse período, Yeats estudou bastante a teosofia de Jacob Boehme para preparar sua edição das obras de Blake junto com Ellis, e que uma de suas fontes de acesso à obra boehmiana foi Franz Hartmann, membro da Sociedade Teosófica, que interpretava Boehme à luz do pensamento do século XIX, como uma ponte construída entre a teosofia clássica e a nova teosofia. Em notas de 1889 em seu diário oculto, Yeats relata que, abre aspas, por volta do Natal de 1888, entrei para a seção esotérica da Sociedade Teosófica. As promessas não me deram problemas, exceto 2. Promessa de trabalhar pela teosofia e promessa de obediência a Blavatsky em todos os assuntos teosóficos. Expliquei minhas dificuldades a Blavatsky. Disse que eu só poderia assinar com a condição de que eu mesmo fosse o juiz do que é teosofia. O termo é amplo o suficiente e considero meu trabalho em Blake uma observância totalmente adequada desta cláusula. Sobre o outro assunto, Blavatsky explicou que esta obediência se referia apenas a coisas relativas à prática oculta, se tal fosse necessário. Desde então, uma cláusula foi inserida fazendo com que cada membro prometesse obediência sujeita à decisão de sua própria consciência. Fecha aspas. Percebe-se que Yeats considerava o conceito de teosofia amplo o suficiente para gerar problematizações, de acordo com seu crivo pessoal, e que seu trabalho sobre Blake estava relacionado ao que entendia como teosofia, ou seja, nesse caso, a teosofia cristã. Em novembro de 1890, Yeats desligou-se dos ciclos teosóficos ingleses devido a seu interesse ardente por evidências práticas e mágicas do campo oculto, o qual não era compartilhado pelos demais membros da Sociedade Teosófica. E um pouco antes disso, em março, havia ingressado na Ordem Hermética da Aurora Dourada, na qual desenvolveu ainda mais seu interesse por magias e hermetismo. Em sua autobiografia, Yeats comentou que a tradição ocidental insistia no poder relacionado ao corpo, enquanto a tradição oriental desprezava a carne e voltava-se para o informal, e que, por conseguinte, a tradição oriental era inadequada para o modo de vida dos ocidentais. Não obstante, Yeats manteve igualmente vivo o interesse pela tradição espiritual hindu, presente na teosofia blavatskiana, e chegou a publicar e comentar ulteriormente materiais clássicos relacionados ao assunto, como as Upanishads. Assim como, e conforme veremos, manteve referências constantes em sua obra posterior aos autores da teosofia cristã, como Boehme, Swedenborg e Blake. Aí aqui eu abordo um pouco mais a relação do Blake com essa teosofia, do Yeats, perdão, com a teosofia cristã, né? Escreveu Yeats na sua autobiografia que, abre aspas, eu tinha uma convicção inabalável, surgindo como de onde eu não posso dizer, que portões invisíveis se abriram para mim como se abriram para Blake, como se abriram para Swedenborg, como se abriram para Boehme, e que essa filosofia encontraria seus manuais de devoção em toda a literatura imaginativa, e colocaria diante dos irlandeses um manual especial de literatura irlandesa que, embora feita por muitas mentes, pareceria o trabalho de uma única mente e transformaria nossos lugares de beleza ou associação lendária em símbolos sagrados. Eu não pensei que essa filosofia seria completamente pagã, pois claro que seus símbolos deveriam ser selecionados dentre todas aquelas coisas que mais moveram os homens durante muitos séculos, principalmente cristãos. Fecha aspas. É digna de nota a convicção de Yeats de que as portas da percepção se abririam para ele, assim como se abriram outrora para Boehme, Swedenborg e Blake, e que essa filosofia teosófica era universal, assim como a imaginação o era, podendo servir para conectar a tradição mítica irlandesa às demais tradições, inclusive a cristã. Essas referências e aportes à teosofia cristã persistiram na obra de Yeats praticamente por toda a vida. Por exemplo, na obra filosófico-poética Per amica silente Nune, de 1918, em que fala, entre outras coisas, sobre Swedenborg, espiritismo, platonismo e a alma do mundo, ou no ensaio Swedenborg, Médiuns e Lugares Desolados, de 1914. Na introdução de Uma Visão, o tema da teosofia ainda é revisitado por Yeats. Abre aspas. Certa vez, eu havia me aprofundado no conhecimento de Blake, até onde os seus livros proféticos inacabados e confusos permitiam, e havia lido Swedenborg e Boehme, e minha iniciação nos discípulos herméticos enchera a minha cabeça de imagens cabalísticas, mas não havia nada em Blake, em Swedenborg, em Boehme ou na Cabala que pudesse me ajudar agora. Eles encorajaram-me, no entanto, a ler a história em relação à sua lógica histórica, e as biografias em relação às suas 28 encarnações típicas, para que eu pudesse dar expressão concreta ao pensamento abstrato. Fecha aspas. Curiosamente, mesmo quando Yeats procura inovar em seu pensamento esotérico, ele ainda ia buscar inspiração nos teósofos que lera na juventude, como disse Graham Young. Segundo Monteith, na introdução de sua obra sobre Yeats e a teosofia, o poeta entendia-se como parte de uma comunidade maior, a comunidade dos teósofos, e é sob essa luz que a sua edição crítica de Blake deve ser colocada. Aí aqui eu cito Monteith, abre aspas. Yeats também foi atraído pela teosofia porque ela lhe oferecia uma posição no universo. Em vez de ser apenas um jovem da Irlanda, a teosofia conectou Yeats a uma comunidade imaginada de conhecimento, uma comunidade conectada ao que parecia ser a verdadeira tradição e história do mundo. Como um membro privilegiado de um círculo interno, essa comunidade confiou a Yeats um conhecimento que tinha que ser protegido e ensinado a outros que também fossem dignos. Essa tradição não se estendeu apenas por textos religiosos, mas textos e figuras literárias. Yeats descobriu, por meio de sua própria leitura estratégica de suas filosofias, que seus próprios heróis literários, Blake, Shelley e Dante, pareciam ter uma linhagem teosófica própria. Fecha aspas. A nosso ver, essa ideia de comunidade lembra igualmente o que o teósofo Eckhart Rosen, no século XVIII, chamou de igreja interior ou igreja invisível, composta por todas as almas dos teósofos que buscam a sabedoria divina, a teosofia, por oposição à igreja exterior ou exotérica. Aqui eu encaminho para uma conclusão provisória. Afinal, seria razoável concluir que Yeats manteve vivas em sua obra a influência tanto da teosofia cristã quanto da teosofia oriental de Blavatsky, como se fundisse ou mesclasse as duas visões teosóficas em uma só, a sua visão. Talvez possamos concluir essa exposição com o relato de Geoffrey Watkin, que mostra em Yeats, depois de 1919, a persistência do mais genuíno espírito teosófico, ou seja, do diálogo universal e da diversidade, tendo sido ele talvez o último grande teósofo do Ocidente. E aqui, para fechar, eu cito Watkin, né? Lembro-me das pessoas que vinham para tomar chá junto a meu pai, conversar a teosofia em seu sentido mais antigo e amplo. Entre os visitantes estavam Yeats, George Russell, James Stephens, Stephen McKenna, Darrell Figgs, Standish Aldrich, entre outros. Quando Yeats e Mead se encontravam por acaso, eles conversavam longamente sobre Plotino, os gnósticos e a filosofia indiana. Ocasionalmente, Waite estava lá, e ele e Yeats conversavam sobre a cabala e o mundo das fadas. Com Barker, que estava editando uma nova edição de Bem, Yeats discutia Bem e sua influência sobre Blake. E eu concluo por aqui. Obrigado.
Muito obrigada, Daniel. Thank you very much. I think now we can open for questions, comments. I already have one comment for the three of you. Eu vou traduzir essa parte, I'll translate this part so Daniel can also participate. Daniel, eu vou abrir para perguntas e comentários e vocês três podem participar. We have seen, from listening to the three of you, we had some idea of the many faces of Yeats. Yeats is a man of letters. Yeats is a medical. Yeats is a philosopher. So, how would you? Okay, this is just a question, and then I open for everyone, and you answer whatever you want. You don't have to follow with answers. But my question is, how would you relate these different figures that you brought to globalization? Having in mind the fact that Irishness was also one of the points in what does it mean to be Irish, what does it mean to dialogue with other authors and traditions. Então, Daniel, eu estou falando que vocês três trouxeram muitas faces, né? Yeats em várias maneiras, como um homem de letras, um editor, um filósofo. E aí a minha pergunta para vocês todos, se vocês quiserem responder, em que medida a globalização tem a ver com isso? Né? Como é que a gente pensa a globalização a partir dessas figuras diferentes? Tendo em vista que também ser irlandês foi uma questão, pertencimento, diálogo com a tradição, com outros autores, com outras nações. And whoever else wants to ask or comment, and then I'll pass on the mic to you. Please share your thoughts.
Well, when I think about, you mentioned globalization, I usually think about book history and text criticism, which is connected to my work. And let's say, Alison Yeats' edition was a 3-volume, very expensive and limited edition, of course, because it was full of facsimiles. So what I think is how this changes with time. I mean, this was limited to very specific people in England, probably, or maybe in Ireland too, but I think mostly in England or in the United Kingdom. And how later with for instance, the reprint by Routledge, we can read it now here from Brazil, we can find it online. It changes the way it is read, I guess, and it makes his view on Blake, from my point of view, it makes it somehow global. That's what I would add to your question.
I think what's saying about Charles Gates and all those writers in globalization. I don't know if we're here in South America in this Gates Society conference for the first time, thanks to globalization or not. I don't know. Maybe we're here against globalization. Depends on how politically they react. I don't know if what Yeats would say about Yeats and globalization. I would say that Joyce and globalization, yes, there's maybe a close relation. Joyce became a market. The word Joyce industry could not have been more right when it was coined, I don't know when, in the 15s or 16s, nobody knows when they started saying Joyce industry, because it's Joyce industry. was something that was very well absorbed and utilized by globalization.
Let's just go ahead and idea. Is it the same case with Yeats? And how big of that is it, please?
So I'll move this around to other people. So my question is to Victor and to William. It's related to the globalization question. It's about genre. Victor, your paper was kind of always playing with the question with genre. The fact is Joyce is a prose writer, Lavoisier a poet, Yeats a lyric poet, but of course they meet through theatre often. It's on a theatrical question at the moment. So there's something happening in genre. William, you started by talking about the short lyric, the emphasis on the short lyric, and the fact that the Yeats Ellis edition took seriously the long mystical text. Is something happening to genre around this time that both Yeats and Joyce are implicated in, and indeed the history of their reception globally is something somehow indexed to the genre? So do something about genre at the time, which might relate to what you're saying about John Gilroy, but also is that something that also influences global reception? Question genre.
So Daniel, uma question from Beres, a questão aqui sobre o gênero e o tempo.
Oh, actually, what I can say, when I mentioned, let me find the quotation here from Ellis and Yeats, when they talk about the Scully editor, they mentioned let's see if I can find it. Well, they mentioned they shun the Scully editors. They are trying to bring every aspect that is not really that we tend to value nowadays, from, let's say, the punctuation and all that. We use this for our close readings, of course, and as in Yeats, we're not interested in that. In fact, they were trying to improve, at least in their review, they're corrected. That's the word they use. Corrected Blake's work. We are doing as if Blake. It's probably what Blake thought. That's what I can say. But what in this same quotation they talk about 10 beautiful. They ruined 10 beautiful songs. So they are mentioning the Scully editors, but they are mentioning poetry. They are not really mentioning prose, for instance. In fact, some of the prose, short prose that Blake wrote, I think it was posted in poetical sketches, they made it become verse, a blunt verse. They adapt it to in sort of, let's say, a way to become probably more defined, something like that. They certainly connected to your question of genre, how they try to make everything poetry, but yeah, they are in the same way they are trying to shun the lyrics. Like, for instance, the Sons of Innocence, of course, they are interested, but they are much less interested in the Sons of Innocence of the History of Experience than they are in the longer poems. They are not that interested in these short lyrics, but certainly poetry is what they are interested
Genre and global reception. It's a good question. It's a good point, because reception is very much it depends very much on how you classify something and you sell it. So, I don't know how it is in relation to Yeats' words, in relation to Joyce's words, very clearly, what it can label as fiction, novel, sells. Whatever is not a novel or fiction simply does not sell well. It's not only the case in Brazil. It does affect the reception. Publishing houses don't want to translate what cannot be labeled. So translators on the page, and some words cannot be labeled in any way. Japan Joyce, for example, is prose, but it's poetic. So what is that? In Joyce's poetry, for example, it's been published and translated more than once by more than one translator in Brazil. Some forms do sell, others just don't. Form Spanish, for example, it sells more because the title, perhaps, it's fun, also people's attention. But chamber music, no, hasn't been reprinted ever. It is a little difficult. My point is that we, and I'm very much involved in this discussion thinking now, is that we have to find new ways of dealing with literature, with poetic texts that do not efface the difference between prose and verse, of course, but that can look at that difference from above, from a different perspective. Because if we continue to think about Joyce as the novelist and Yeats as the poet, for example, it will always be a plot. And that's why I quoted Meshonique. Meshonique is one very important theoretician, thinker, as I like to say, and he was very much into translation, for example. And he was saying, we can read another way. We can find a way of reading literature that is not in terms of prose and poetry. First of all, because it's a big mistake. It's prose and verse, not prose and poetry. It's not, we should follow the dichotomy of the sign. Signifier, signified, signifier, signified. We're always stuck in that labyrinth. You have to escape that. Look at literature from a different perspective. This is why you say Milton, Joyce, and Yeats were poets. Oh, but there are differences. Great. But they're poets. Can you see that? In being deconstructing so many things, beginning in our universities, where power relations are very well established, and sometimes saying that those differences should approximate and not distance means that your area of influence may, conflict. My area of influence, your budget, my budget, your walls, my walls, your world, my world, funding, etc., and authority over students, etc. This is all we have to be against in the end. In the end, it's very much political. Yes, it is. Everything is. Thank you very much.
Victor, from what you were saying there, it kind of crystallized what my question was going to be, and it's also related to what William was saying to him in John Gilroy. And it's probably that I apologize if this is a kind of anglophone question, right? Because I know the question of the globalization of the study of the humanities is an issue here, and it's important in what it is that we're talking about. But what you seem to be describing is a crisis in kind of pedagogy, a crisis which, as you describe it, seems to affect you here in Brazil, in the same way as it's beginning to affect us in the Western world, whatever it is. But the crisis manifests itself in study of literature and in the question of the professionalization of the subject, which then is brilliantly the way in which William's paper and yours were working together, because the process of scholarly essaying is for many kind of literary critics of a particular empirical mind. I mean, Peter McDonald would give an example of this, where you could be a poet and a critic and an editor, and the scholarly editing is crucially what it is that one does. But of course, one doesn't always do that, and the majority of us don't do that. And part of what we're doing is describing the history of the scholarly editing. But this brings you back to whatever this question is, the crisis that we have in the professing of our literature, the professing literature, which is the title of a book by John Gilroy, and there was another, it's most recently. There was a reference to one of the cultural capitalist previous book as well too. And where he goes through all kinds of different models of literary criticism, all fulfilling in many ways in the modern day academe. But I think that one of the solutions that he's suggesting, and that some of the people who are here may also be suggesting, is exactly what's going on in the pages of Ulysses. And it's also happening in Proust, which you mentioned, in the way that it wasn't happening. I'm trying to think of another example, George Eliot, okay, which is the work with artwork appears in another artwork, but there is a critical conversation which is established within the artwork with the previous artwork. In Joyce and the Stoic Purpose episode of Ulysses, this is one of the best things you can possibly read on the history of the Irish Revival. While Stephen is talking nonsense about Hamlet all the way through, well, it's not like nonsense, but anyway, but it's not really what's going on there. What's going on there is a bunch of apparatchiks, all kind of jostling, small scale figures, all jostling for influence, and George Russell, who might be the kind of impresario, is in the middle of this. And of course, Stephen is there, and of course, well, Stephen, like Joyce, was pointedly not included in Russell's anthology of poetry, although Russell did publish the Sisters and a couple of the other earlier short stories. The same thing in Proust. It's a modernist issue, and it's something to do with the beginnings of literary criticism in a creative work of art. In George Eliot's Middlemarch, for instance, if Dorothea Brooke goes to Rome, it is to have a bad time. Right? It's not necessarily any aesthetic or artistic engagement with what's going there. It's to do with her moral humiliation and the great mistake that she's made in her life by marrying this ghastly, desiccated scholar type. Right? But scholar types are, at this point in time, I think, in our discipline, finding their way through what they're doing. Yes, the ethic is still going on. Yes, that professionalization part of what is going on, but also the other thing that's going on is also what's happening in the texts themselves. And as you say, this exchange between different works of art with each other, it used to be called intertextuality. I suppose that's a theory of illusion. It's a different kind of thing. I don't know what you call this thing, but the creative critical interface is kind of the future of what we're doing. And reading Joyce on Yeats is one of the ways of thinking about that. Or reading Yeats on Blake is another very, very, very example of that. There's a creative interaction between the two. And that's, I think, an optimistic position that we could be in at this point in time.
Thank you very much.
Is there an answer to that?
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Well, thank you for maybe sending that out as well. I'm not going to provide an answer there, but it was very cool. I mean, maybe in a certain way, I can relate to what I was saying to ask, which is a rather narrow question, but in a sense, partly what we're talking about is genre and collaboration. I think there's one of the interesting things that we're both touching on is the possibility that we sort of blurring of genres as well as the definition of genres. One of the blurring is talking about it between critical and creative work. And evidently that's happening in the solo edition of Great Players. Well, by the way, thank you. You're very thoughtful. I think you might overestimate my knowledge of that edition very kindly. It gave an insight I'm not sure I had, but I was suspecting, I think, when we had the conversation online, that some of the slower stuff, punctuation likely was probably more likely to be errors, given that Yeats had antipathetic relations with his own punctuation, so they can't do this synchronization. It's not a smart version. On the other hand, in terms of the shaping of the edition, what they're trying to do, I'd be interested in actually your thoughts about what Andrew had in each part of it. But what struck me was interesting was, well, two things. One, obviously the extensive notes, which is partly comes to what Matt talked about with those kind of overlaps. I'm not talking about this way, but just in a generic way. It's not a great step there to then write sentiments to your own poetry and read, therefore later on to the right hand, put your own notes in there, and that's inevitably blurring the definition between a poem and something that's slowly you're trying to bring it to yourself, or providing slowly for a certain time. I don't say that it's supposed to do that by no means, but it's influential and obviously to a sense, the most influential by editing. The other thing that I'm surprised at the end is like, some of them, as we were talking yesterday, some of them themselves change the spelling or change the formatting or change all these kind of things. Perhaps not turning prose into poetry in the way that Yeats does, of course, anticipating his own methods in philosophy of modern verse, creating poetry, particularly blank verse, interesting. And I'd be really interested to know if you know anything about how they do that or why they do that. It might be Yeats doing that, but I don't know any of the examples of them doing that before 36, so I'm interested in that. The other thing is the reproduction of the art. So it's slight contradiction to the point. I can't quite agree that Yeats is a poet, and that's why we're here. Blake is a poet, and that's why we're here, but actually also not. He was a printer and a engraver and all kind of things. The book that Charlie and Tom and I edited with Yeats in the art and was partly about kind of breaking down the idea that this was just a poet and just that, we were collaborating with all sorts of things. Yeats is a great example of that. To include the works of art, even with printed reproduction. But you don't get it with reprints. The more you get in the online thing, perhaps you do. I don't think so.
There's a digital edition of the Alice in Yeats edition.
Can you see the reprints of the? My question really is, how did that come about? Obviously, I know we know already that Yeats was interested in those prints. He owns some prints. Blake and Dante, so certainly it was his impetus partly to make sure that there was like his printing involved. At least he would be very likely to be the guiding influence behind it. How did they do the reproduction? Do you know anything about how that came about? But that is something that Blake studies loses for about 100 years, frankly, until like the late 80s and 90s, and maybe exhibitions in the table and things start saying, "Oh, Blake is actually an artist," and look, he's not just an artist, and he's a poet, he's a printmaker, and that those things are inseparable. There's something important about the supposed unity of the arts that's a conception of Yeats, so people return to, and he's clearly borrowing from Blake and allowing him to have that, but also in creative edition. So those are sort of two half questions to you, but I hope that speaks to the general discussion with confidence.
When we were talking, I was thinking, first thing that they made the lithographies themselves. This is very interesting, and I don't remember if I said this in the last presentation, but anyway, they talk about correcting the mistakes in the drawings. In the illuminated plates, they say, oh, these are very obvious mistakes, and one needs to restrain himself for not trying to correct the illuminated plates in a way similar to what they did with the writing. They feel somehow, or they feel they can improve the writing or at least in what they are saying. They feel they can go back to Yeats' thought, but they refrain from doing that with the printings. Also something that I was thinking about while we were talking. You mentioned okay, because he brings all the facsimiles. This is certainly very important in the transmission of Yeats's works. This certainly will not appear in Kane's edition, which became authoritative when he published this in 1925, and later with Erdmann. Of course, in my PhD dissertation, I talk about this and how these editions become cheaper. There's two ways of going about, because the Alice in Yeats is a very much more interesting in this way of bringing all of the facsimiles, but it's so limited and it's so expensive. Only a very few people will be able to have this. So when you just print in a typographical way, a sort of a standard way, you can put Blake there on the world, right? So, and also another thing that you mentioned, that it is important they brought the facsimiles. I was also thinking, yes, they bring the facsimiles, but they certainly don't read as we do nowadays. Well, of course, but they are the objective. Their objective, at least from what they wrote, is that the designs complement the design somehow helps you understand Blake's mythopietude. So they make a whole section. Oh, this design is for, or this design is uniform, and this is so and so scene from these books. But what they are reading is about these designs is a sort of relation, a hierarchical relation where the text is really the most important, whereas nowadays Blake studies would probably put both in like a sort of dialectical relation. Yeah.
Maybe, well, thank you for your comments, both, maybe addressing both at the same time. Yes, maybe it's time for us to go back to what is in the text and what is happening in the texts, so that we see in that an openness to not have to follow rules of genre departments, disciplines, whatever. Yes, but we're here because Yeats is a poet, but Blake, it's like the Blake is not only a poet, Yeats is not only a poet in the strict sense of the word. Joyce is not only a poet. So why did Joyce choose down by the Seven Lords to sing in his most important night as a singer in Dublin in 1904, when he shared the stage with John Cormack? Why did he choose that song? Why did he sat? He goes the furthest to music, and we should look to that as a source of as a source of elements to build something about. Essayism is the word maybe. Something in between the scientific paper. We can't stand that anymore. Huh? Journals saying you have to write this way, that way, and follow all those rules. Essayism is maybe the way out of where we are really stuck in the academia. And it's not only in Brazil, it's all over. We're stuck in the same place. So what is the relation between that song and Joyce and music and the multiple genres of Ulysses and the Moscatel grapes? Yeah, Maria Rita was saying that Yeats mentions the Moscatel grapes. Joyce does too. A very important moment in the portrait of the artist as a young man. I never eat Moscatel grapes from the Count of Monte Cristo. He quotes that. What is the relation between those grapes and these two authors and music? Something has to come out of this pregnancy of possibilities. It's just a matter of looking another way, I think.
Thank you. I have a question to Danielle. Does anyone have a question for me? Danielle, eu queria perguntar, it's a very simple question, I'll translate it immediately afterwards. A very simple, uma pergunta bem simples. Quando você pensou nessa relação da teosofia, da influência do Yeats para os teólogos no Brasil, isso tudo chega pela sociedade brasileira, bíblica brasileira? Você sabe? Você pensou a questão da tradução? So I'm asking Daniel if this thought of, or he's been aware of how these works get to Brazil. Is it through the translation of the Brazilian Bible Society? Você considerou isso? Have you considered that? Or you have no idea? Or how?
Desculpa, tá baixo para mim, não entendi a pergunta direito, perdão.
Então, eu vou repetir. Eu queria saber se você pensou na relação dessas obras que você cita como tendo chegado ao Brasil pela sociedade bíblica brasileira. Ou você não pensou na questão da tradução?
Não considerei essa questão da tradução, não pensei nisso, de fato. Eu poderia comentar a questão sobre a globalização que você fez anteriormente também?
Sim, por favor. Se você comentar a globalização.
Tá. Eu ainda não estou suficientemente globalizado, então eu vou falar em português, mas no próximo evento eu prometo que eu vou estar melhor no inglês, tá? Eu vejo que a teosofia, no sentido amplo desse conceito, não deve ser acaso, ela sempre reaparece em contextos que a gente pode chamar de globalização, num sentido bem amplo, de sincretismo cultural, religioso. Por exemplo, na antiguidade, tardia, Alexandria, Roma, Atenas, que é o contexto dos neoplatônicos, No Renascimento, Florença, as cidades italianas, mesmo cidades alemãs, esse contexto da Renascença, de novo, um sincretismo cultural, hermetismo, platonismo, cabala, e não era muito diferente, resguardadas as proporções do que acontecia na Europa do final do século XIX, que é quando aparece a teosofia da sociedade teosófica. Então, acho que isso é um ponto interessante. Há uma ligação entre teosofia e globalização, pelo menos no sentido cultural do termo. E o Yeats, claro, nesse sentido, ele é uma figura de uma cultura universal. Eu diria que ele é um herdeiro legítimo dos magos eruditos da Renascença, como Ficino, Pico della Mirandola. A gente vê no Yeats o domínio da tradição celta, do neoplatonismo, do platonismo, da cabala, de Blake, Swedenborg, das tradições indianas. Claro que, ao mesmo tempo, e aí é uma coisa a ser aprofundada, dá para perceber algumas tensões nisso, Por exemplo, a gente sabe que o Yeats, ele fala em algum momento que a tradição oriental não é adequada aos ocidentais, e ele mesmo se volta para a magia e o hermetismo, quando ele entra na Golden Dawn, porque ele não percebe na teosofia o interesse pela tradição ocidental, pelo menos não um interesse prioritário. Ao mesmo tempo, ele não abandona a tradição hindu em nenhum momento, nem abandona Jacob Boehme, Blake. Então, acho que essas tensões precisariam um objeto de pesquisa ser melhor aprofundado, e até eu gostaria futuramente de conseguir fazer um pouco isso.
Muito obrigada. Thank you. Daniel was referring to the 19th century Theosophy Society as he wanted to come the big umbrella theme of globalization. And I also want to take a moment to thank Professor Michael Campbell for the wonderful comment on the issue, and that goes well with what Victor said regarding our endless job of speaking, reading, and writing. And one last thing, just really a comment, if no one else has comments, I want to take advantage of the fact that I have the word. Mention also Daniel's comment on the consideration of the East and West relations and how, and this is my comment, how this is all simplified from our own perspective. But leave it to you if you have any other comments or questions. Yeah, please. And this is also connected with gender, because with time,
I just have a kind of, it's a question of practical William. The Blake edition, do they have models in mind that they're working from? Are there kind of any equivalent editions? The level of commentary in that edition is very striking, and it's I suppose, are they thinking, is it a kind of a cult tradition of annotation, or is it because I can't. Are there similar editions, not only kind of, I suppose, 19th century writers, or in the 19th century or 18th century writers, or so I'm just wondering where that, the level of annotation that you're talking about, where's that coming from? You've got any sense of?
That is a great question. Maybe I didn't think about that. From what I researched on the traditional romantic poets, their dishes are certainly not that annotated, and I would probably think it comes more from the folk tradition. It's my bet, but I don't have the anyway to say to you. Even scholarly editions of Shakespeare, they tend to focus on in the 19th century. I believe they tend to focus more on textual issues and not on the interpretation as Ellis and Yeats were doing. So yeah, I believe it comes more from a culture tradition.
Just on that point, I agree. I'm very down in my idea. Sorry. It's a religious tradition, isn't it? And Kabbalah and so on. This is. I mean, you do scholarly exegesis on the Bible or religious texts, the Torah or something of that kind, which I think says something about the view of what the kind of they're trying to portray, isn't it? He's a quasi-religious figure or a cult figure. That's what I think. And in fact, of course, that can. I'm hesitant to say it's just that. Of course, things are already satirized from the beginning of print. Jonathan Swift and Tubman satirizing the possibility of over-annotating text, including in early editions of works. Over-annotation has already been a kind of comic process a long time before, say, after Tito Nabokov, Power Fire or something like that, which a whole novel was woven out of slightly over determined weird annotation. But anyway, I would assume it comes from perhaps even a pre-print tradition of scholarly instances of biblical or religious texts in some form.
Probably also Swedenborg's text. It has a lot of there's one, I don't remember the name really, which he does the Genesis. So it's a lot. He writes a lot, and then editions just bring like the chapter. So it was more like it would be more on that tradition, yes, than the.
Obrigada. Thank you all. No more questions or comments. I think we can move on. Ladies, have anyone want after? Oh, okay. So thank you.